I'm looking forward to this conversation with Kendall, co-managing editor at D1 Baseball. Give him a follow on Twitter. If you're a college baseball fan, you already do. It's at Kendall Rogers. And I had forgotten. I didn't even realize. I should have realized. I'd looked at D1 Baseball this morning. We are at the midway point of the college baseball season. And here it is. It's just the college basketball season just ended. D1 Baseball just put out their midseason report, which includes all kinds of All-America choices, pitcher player of the year, biggest surprises, biggest disappointments. So, Kendall, the first question I would give you here is at the midseason point of the season, is Arkansas a surprise? They can't be a disappointment, or are they right about where you thought they would be?
They're probably a little ahead of where I thought they'd be. Coming into the season, I was, one of those people that when we kind of debated as a staff, and I'm not like throwing the rest of our staff under the bus here, but I'm just saying, they were kind of more in the 10 to 14 range with Arkansas, and I was more in the 7 to 8 range. I just thought when you look at this team, there's no doubt. On paper, when you look at the rotation, you're like, okay, well, I'm not in love with it. But I think when you looked at the pitching depth, you looked at the pieces offensively, it was easy to project this team being an elite club. I think the biggest difference for me is, I didn't think they'd be, 1 or 2 at this point in the year. But there's no doubt they're that good. I mean, if you look at the rotation, obviously, the rotation being a little off and on at times, as Ever Million wasn't great over the weekend against Auburn. There's no doubt they need to fix that. There's time to fix that. But when you look at the pitching staff as a whole, I mean, you just think of how many weapons, Matt Hobbs has. Kevin Cobbs has had a terrific spring. Jackson Wiggins is quite a weapon. Peyton Paulette is an elite pitcher. So they've got the weapons. And then when you look at this club from an offensive standpoint, I mean, what is there not to like? And I get it. Like, for whatever reason at Baum, they don't feel like knocking the cover off the ball a lot of the time. But, boy, it's like when you get them away from home, they just go crazy. So there are very few things to dislike about this team. I think the only thing for me is I would just slide down the stretch. If you're looking at playing for a national championship, solidifying the weekend rotation. And, everybody has those issues at times. You look at Vanderbilt, Kumar Rocker and Jack Leiter are amazing. Like, they could be the best two best pitchers in college baseball. I think Jack Leiter is the best. But they also have a hole in the number 3 spot. So Arkansas is not alone.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at the RPI rankings just a moment ago. Arkansas is number 1 in the RPI rankings, and right now we're more into the SEC standings. And I know everybody looks at the polls and all of that, and that means something to a lot of people. Right now, it's about RPI and about SEC standings. This weekend is obviously huge for the standings aspect of it. When you look at the RPI and probably the polls too, Kendall, those first 3 games for Arkansas, wins over Texas Tech, Texas Christian, and Texas, 3 teams who, by the way, have been crushing it since that weekend. That's why Arkansas is ranked where they are. Mississippi State sweep is one thing. That's great. 7-2 in the SEC, yes. All that together with the 3-0 that weekend in Texas, that's why the Hogs are ranked where they are.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, you look at those 3 teams opening weekend. I mean, UT, swept South Carolina at home. That's something that Vanderbilt couldn't do. I'm not saying Texas is as good as Vanderbilt or not, but they swept South Carolina and Austin. TCU's now 6-0 in the Big 12. They got a big series at Texas Tech, and I just think when you look at Texas Tech, I mean, I know Texas Tech is a lot like Arkansas. Like, they can really hit. They've got a lot of depth on the mound. But, their rotation can be a little iffy at times. So Texas Tech is very similar to Arkansas. They didn't play great at Globe Life, but yeah, I mean, the fact that Arkansas played that well, it probably gave us a little bit of, false hope in the sense that they play like that every single weekend. I feel like Mississippi State weekend and Globe Life weekend, I feel like the Hogs are playing like the 1917 Yankees. And, they're probably not that good. They're probably somewhere a little bit in the middle there.
So now we get this huge series this weekend with Ole Miss, and it's pretty well accepted now that the biggest rival in the SEC for Arkansas baseball right now is Ole Miss. LSU's fallen off a little bit, and these teams played 7 times 2 years ago, Kendall, including the Super Regional. There's no love lost between these programs, and they're still playing at the same level they were 2 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the series on paper, the really interesting thing for me, and I hate to see it, it gives Arkansas more of a chance to win the series. So if you're a Hog fan, you're kind of like, okay, I'll take that. But, as somebody who likes seeing the 2 teams at full strength, Ole Miss not having Tim Elko this weekend is a big deal. You're talking about a guy who's hitting 340 big-time power numbers, a mainstay in the middle of that lineup, and he's not going to play this week because of knee injury. He may not play the rest of the year. So, not having him certainly hurts Ole Miss, but when you look at the Rebels on the mound, there's only one pitcher in college baseball with more strikeouts than Gunnar Hoagland. That's Jack Leiter. So when you look at Hoagland and Casey, both those guys pitch really well in big situations. And Derek Diamond's got a big-time arm. This is a toss-up series. I expect Arkansas to play at a high level offensively. I think the differentiator here between the two teams, I probably have a little bit more trust in Ole Miss's weaker rotation. So when you balance those two things out, what that gives me is a very, very even series. I don't think it's going to be like Mississippi State where Arkansas just goes in there and punches them around, because I think Mississippi State has its own host of issues from an offensive standpoint right now, whereas Ole Miss, I feel like, is a pretty balanced club.
Is this a matter of the starting pitching of Ole Miss versus the Arkansas bullpen? I know they don't face each other, obviously. They got to go up against the hitters. But the Arkansas strength is in relief. Now, part of that relief strength recently, Peyton Paulette, he's starting on Saturday instead. So Vermillion's back in the pen, and he's been really good when he's been in relief too. So is it too simple to say that's what this weekend is about?
It could be. I mean, I think if you're Arkansas, you guys like Hoagland and Casey, you try to get their pitch counts up early and kind of tap into that bullpen, because Taylor Broadway is a really, really nice arm out of their bullpen. But I definitely give the advantage bullpen-wise to a team like Arkansas. So, yeah, I would say the bullpens could come in handy, especially in that last game this weekend.
Kendall Rogers from D1 Baseball joining us here on Halftime. When you look at this Ole Miss-Arkansas matchup, I feel like, Kendall, that this is the rivalry for the SEC as far as just with SEC baseball. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, certainly right now. I mean, I think Phil alluded to it. LSU's down. Typically, LSU Arkansas is a lot of fun. But, LSU's down. Mississippi State, Ole Miss would still be pretty high up there. But, in terms of just the Hogs, yeah, I would agree with Ole Miss.
When you look at Ole Miss, and we mentioned this earlier, Tim Elko tore his ACL when they were taking on Alcorn State earlier. What does the absence of Tim Elko for Ole Miss really do to this Ole Miss team moving forward?
Well, what ends up happening, and, it happens all around college baseball. You get a big-time player gets hurt, people step up and kind of pick up the slack. What'll be interesting with Ole Miss is, kind of twofold. Number one, like, he was a big leader. He was kind of their field general. And number two, just his powerful presence in the lineup. When you're in the SEC, one of the big things coaches always say is, like, you really, really need to have, 3-4-hole type of hitter who can hit for big-time power. And that's kind of it's not kind of, it is who Tim Elko was. And so not having him in the lineup, does Ole Miss approach Arkansas maybe a little differently offensively from a strategic standpoint, or do they continue as they were with Tim Elko? So with not having him, to me, will be very, very interesting to see this weekend.
When we had you on, and you brought up LSU just a moment ago, and when we had you on earlier in the spring, we're talking about like this full horse race that was like going to be leading the way in the SEC West between Arkansas, the Mississippi schools, and LSU. And Kendall, man, LSU has not played up to what we thought they could be. What's going on down in Baton Rouge right now with these LSU Tigers?
Yeah, they're a hot mess. I guess what's scary for Arkansas fans is when y'all play them later in conference, like, that's going to be their season, is ruining Arkansas's weekend. But I think when you look at LSU overall, they're just not very good. Like, I saw them against Vanderbilt last week, and I get it. Like, Vandy makes a lot of people look terrible. But when you look at LSU, Jaden Hill didn't have great numbers, but he had premium stuff. So you can look down the stretch and go, okay, when you look at LSU's remaining schedule, it is a little bit manageable, and if Phil can just get back on track, they're fine. Or they're not fine, but, like, they could sneak into a regional. Well, now Jaden Hill's out for the year, so you're in a situation to where you've got to have Landon Marceau go to Fridays permanently, and you've got to throw a guy like Blake Money in there, a freshman, into the weekend rotation. So you're wanting to turn the season around with a freshman nestled into the weekend rotation. And, oh, by the way, your offense against premier pitchers is doing absolutely nothing. So I think LSU's in big trouble. I mean, they're 1-8 in the SEC. I actually feel better about Auburn at 1-8. I think y'all kind of saw that in Fayetteville. I think Auburn has just kind of played under its potential all year long. Whereas I'm not so sure LSU is much better than what they're playing right now. Like, I don't think the potential is there from a pitching standpoint to be a lot better. So I would be very shocked, actually, at this point, if LSU makes the postseason. I'd be very, very shocked.
Kendall, we just lost Phil for a second. His internet has died, so it's going to be me and you probably for the rest of this segment here.
All right.
One of the big things we wanted to touch on with you also was the news that you broke earlier this week with the NCAA announcing that they're going to predetermine the host for the regionals and the super regionals. And Kendall, I think is it pretty much a foregone conclusion that we're going to see regionals and supers inside Baum-Walker Stadium?
Oh yeah, it's a foregone conclusion. The NCAA, for the most part, is still going to use merit as the number one thing and the number one way they're choosing regionals. They will look at location. I think one of the teams to kind of keep an eye on in that regard is somebody like Michigan, who will probably win the Big Ten, who has a higher RPI, but will win the Big Ten is ranked, but the RPI is in like the 60s. Some people are going to be surprised in a couple of weeks when a team like that is a host. But I have no doubt because of geography and things like that Michigan or someone in the Big Ten will be a host. So for the most part, I think things will be pretty normal. The teams that hurt or these mid-majors who, they go on a run at the end of May, they win their conference tournament, and oh, by the way, they're a 15 or 16 seed and they're hosting. So they might be a 15 or 16 seed, but this year they'll be on the road.
You brought up the regionality with different things like that. How much regionality can we expect with something like this? Because obviously, like the SEC schools, and yes, we're biased because we're the SEC fans of this whole thing. Yeah. But, the best stadiums lie here in the SEC, and you might also branch out into the Big 12, the ACC, different schools like that. But how much regionality do you expect the NCAA to go with here?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. The NCAA actually told me when I talked to them a couple of days ago, they felt like things are going to be pretty normal from an actual pairing standpoint. Uh-huh. But, the thing that'll be really interesting to me is like out west, the California schools, if they could only have, and I'll kind of lump Oregon in here too because they have similar state rules. But, if you're at Oregon State and you can only have 150 people in your ballpark, like, are you really going to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars to host a regional? I think that's a legit question. So if that happens, does the NCAA even give California or Oregon a host site? Do they just put a couple in Arizona and, add maybe one or two to the Southwest region? That's going to be really interesting to follow.
Heck yeah. Kendall, real quick before we let you go, you brought up Kumar Rocker and Jack Leiter earlier in the segment here. You're an MLB general manager. You got the number one overall pick. Who you taking, Rocker or Leiter?
I go with Jack Leiter. I tell you what, watching him in Baton Rouge last week, I'll be honest with you. I've been covering the sport for 14 years, and I don't think I've ever been that impressed with someone. Just his approach, his maturity, the stuff was outstanding. He's a total package. And I think, I like the guy who can get a lot of swings and misses with his fastball. There's no doubt Kumar could do that with a slider. But you know what? When you can throw a fastball on the inside corner and just punch dudes out left and right, give me that guy.
Absolutely. That's Kendall Rogers from D1 Baseball. Make sure you check him out at d1baseball.com. Kendall, we appreciate you joining us here on Halftime.
Thanks, guys. Y'all be good.
I appreciate it, Kendall. We'll do it again for the College World Series when that comes around. That's Kendall Rogers. Check out all his great work at d1baseball.com. Halftime today brought to you by our friends over at 906 Cocktail and Cigar Lounge. These guys are back in action, ready to serve you Tuesday through Thursday, 4 p.m. to midnight, and Friday and Saturday from 4 p.m. to 1 a.m. Make sure you check out their Facebook page at 906 Cocktail and Cigar Lounge for a complete and update on schedules for live music and events that they're hosting over there at 906. Check out their new menu items from the kitchen, as well as some of your old favorites like those 906 wings that Ty just loves so much. 906, they are abiding by all the guidelines with social distancing and state-of-the-art airflow system. So if you don't want to smell like a cigarette when you come out or a cigar, their airflow system will make you smell good as new. That's 906 Cocktail and Cigar Lounge. Sample, indulge, and escape at 906 Garrison Avenue in downtown Fort Smith.